Hey guys, welcome to Hughes History. We're going to do Reconstruction for you guys. We're going to chop it up and we're going to serve it up on a plate of learning. Nothing too in-depth, nothing too crazy, but if you're in an American history course, you need to know the basics. You really, really do. And if you're a human being, you're probably going to be interested because it's a fascinating story, and I think it's really one that kind of helps define the next 100 years in American history. So 1865 to 1877, get out of the way because we're going to run it over. All right, guys, let's do it. Giddy up. You couldn't see me, but I was moonwalking. All right, guys, Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877. Really basic concepts, nothing too in-depth. We're going to save that for further study. But generally, if you give yourself a hug and then you give yourself a slug, you'll generally understand that there are two major plans for Reconstruction. The hugging plan, let's start with that, is really the presidential plans. Remember, Lincoln fought the Civil War to save the Union. Andrew Johnson is from Tennessee. So these are two guys that really aren't into vengeance. Like, they don't want to punish the South. They want to really just kind of wrap this baby up and kind of think about other things. The Republican Party was founded really as a business party, a free soil party, but it's very much interested in kind of the northern industrial sector and building railroads and communication, transportation, and expanding business and innovation. So the idea of the Republican Party, and there's conservative Republicans and moderate Republicans that really weren't interested in, what can we do for the freedmen, for the ex-slaves. I'm not saying they're ready to throw them under the bus completely, but that's not their prime objective. And if you think of why they fought the Civil War in the first place, Lincoln and the moderate Republicans and most Northerners didn't fight to free slaves, which is a much better story, and certainly there's abolitionists, and we'll talk about that. But at the end of the day, they fought the Civil War to save the Union. So if the Union is saved, what are we doing talking about punishing the South? And there's also this concept that they never left the Union. Secession is unconstitutional. So even though maybe the rebel governments, did I say rebel? The rebel governments kind of, left the United States, the people were still citizens. That was an illegal action. So the idea of punishing them to let them back in is kind of like saying, if you have a 15-year-old kid and the kid runs away, and then you're saying, hey, mister, if you want to live in this house, you're going to do these things. No, the kid lives in the house. He just ran away, but he still occupies the residency of your home. So the hugging plan is very much an easy Reconstruction plan. Lincoln certainly supported the 13th Amendment. He might have even eventually, thought about black vote. And he talked, privately with some of his friends about this, and he would say maybe some blacks could vote if they were literate, but he wasn't as kind of progressive and liberal as someone like, say, Thaddeus Stevens, which we'll talk about in a second. So the hugging plan is the easy plan. We're talking about like a 10% loyalty oath, the 13th Amendment, some type of Freedmen's Bureau, maybe to re-educate or deal with the freedmen problem as Lincoln saw it, but really nothing about equal protection, nothing about real citizenship, and certainly nothing about military occupation or doing anything militarily to help the freedmen. So if that's a hug, what the hell is a slug? So Thaddeus is the slugger. It's the radical Republicans. If you think about the Republican Party back then as a conservative party and a moderate Republican Party being more kind of business orientated, there is also the left wing of the Republicans, which is called the radical Republicans. These are abolitionists. And I'm not saying that they don't hold the same business principles as maybe as a Lincoln, but they are in it to protect black rights. And, maybe it's political, maybe they're looking at votes, but I certainly think that there is some strong human rights philosophy that's going on there, especially with Thaddeus Stevens. So nevertheless, this is their plan for Reconstruction. Not only do they want a Civil Rights Act, which they're going to get, and we'll find out in other lectures that it's going to kind of putter out, a Civil Rights Act of 1866, which we're going to write into law black citizenship and black equal protection and all that cool stuff. But they're going to write it into the Constitution, and they're going to make it a requirement for the southern states to pass these amendments to come back into the government. So they see the South as have leaving as have left, and that we can do whatever we want as the winner of this war against the rebels to dictate the conditions that they come back in the Union. So that's the slug. That's the punch in the face, right? And if you're a freedman, if you're an African American back then, you're like, yeah, Slug them good, because I don't trust the bastage. So we have the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery. The 14th Amendment, guaranteeing equal protection and due process from their state as well as citizenship. And then the black male vote with no requirements. So, 50% loyalty oath, military occupation. That's the big one. I always ask my kids, when's the first black senator elected? And many times they're yelling out, 1973. It's like 1867, baby. Because African-American males were allowed to vote. Now, many of these were carpetbaggers, northerners who came to the South, and certainly there is kind of maybe a prophet scallywag thing going on in terms of some southerners who were jumping on the Reconstruction bandwagon, and I'm sure there's some corruption going on. But this is black representation. You have to remember that by making African-American citizens, that is kind of like nullifying the Three-Fifths Compromise, meaning that the southern states are going to get more representation in this Congress. So to not protect black rights, I mean, think about kind of like the hypocrisy and the irony that's going on there. If we just let the southern governments be kind of, racist Democrats back then and electing racist Democrat politicians who are going to ignore black rights but get more representation because blacks are citizens. So Reconstruction, I think for that 10-year period, is definitely kind of a turbulent period, but there is some guarantee of voting rights, and there's certainly some economic mobility beginning in the black community. But many blacks in the Reconstruction period became sharecroppers, which really is another word for slavery in the sense of living on the land and doing the cotton thing and basically having to pay the former plantation owner for that parcel of land to rent and the materials to rent. It's not a good show, baby. So Reconstruction, first you got Hughes, remember that, Lincoln and Johnson, and then you have the radical Republicans as the sluggers. So that's kind of the battle that goes on. Let's really look at Johnson a little bit and the impeachment, and then we'll see if we can't come to some conclusions about Reconstruction. So Andrew Johnson was from Tennessee. Why would Lincoln pick someone from Tennessee to be the vice president? And I think that it goes back to what we keep saying. Lincoln is interested in saving the Union. So therefore, by picking a Tennessean into the vice president, he's showing the South, I'm interested in bringing this country back together. So once Lincoln is assassinated in 1865, we have now President Johnson. And if the radical Republicans thought that Lincoln was a pain in the ass to deal with, Johnson's got nothing on Lincoln. So Johnson really starts going on kind of like a veto fest. Anything the radicals were trying to do, he would veto them. But what happened was in 1865, the southern states started playing hanky-panky right away. As the military is kind of like broken up, there's no military occupation, it's kind of in limbo. They know slavery's abolished, but they're not going to have any black equality going on. So they started passing black codes, which were basically laws that took rights away from any black man or women. Blacks couldn't own guns, they couldn't marry, they couldn't gospel, they couldn't vote, they couldn't participate in politics. And I think that the North kind of was like, no way. We didn't just lose like 500,000 guys so you could do this again. So I think that affected the 1866 congressional races, and the Republicans just slammed the Democrats in the North, and really garner a 2/3 majority in the Senate with Senator Sumter and Congressman Thaddeus Stevens kind of running the House, that they have radical republicanism now. So not only that, but they can go up against Andrew Johnson, and they do that when he violates the Tenure of Office Act. The Tenure of Office Act is basically a way for the radical Republicans kind of to slap Andrew Johnson and go, look, you go do it my way. And that way was that he had to get permission to fire a cabinet member from Congress. So when he fires his Secretary of War and Congress is like, no, you don't, he's like, yeah, I did. Eventually, Andrew Johnson is found not guilty by, I think, one vote, becomes a lame duck presidency. But at that point, radical Republicans really begin to control the agenda. So that's how you get that military occupation, and that's how you get the Freedmen's Bureau in full force, and that's how you get the 13th, the 14th, and the enforceable 15th Amendment. So for that 10-year period, things were pretty groovy. Let's look at the end of Reconstruction and see if we can't figure out how this becomes a terrible failure at the end of the day. I think I'm going to blame it on money. Everything is money's fault. And certainly there is an economic depression, recession in 1873 when the stock market crashes. And I think what really occurs is, to be honest, kind of like an eye off the ball situation. Republicans, which, were putting attention on black rights and black protection, really start kind of taking their eye off the ball in 1873 as they start to lose House seats because of the economic recession. But they're now dealing with money and economics. So this is kind of like a sucky story. In 1876, there's a presidential election between Samuel Tilden, the Southern Democrat, and Rutherford B. Hayes, the Northern Republican. And we become kind of electorally deadlocked, reminding me of 2000 and Bush and Gore. Not only that, but it's the same state that's kind of up, which is Florida. So African Americans will sometimes refer to this as the Great Betrayal. It's called in textbooks the Compromise of 1877. But nevertheless, what happens is basically the South says, you want the presidency? You want the presidency? Take it. And take the troops with you. And that's what happens. When those troops leave, the white South isn't ready to treat African Americans yet with dignity and respect. So I can almost visually see in my head as the troops are leaving, the white kind of KKK, is jumping out down there. And then really you have a solid South, a solid Democratic South. And not the Democratic Party of today. This is the Democratic Party of segregation, of Jim Crow, of states' rights, of, the 10th Amendment, but the 10th Amendment against civil rights. So, that's it, guys. Jim Crow is going to rear its ugly head. In 1896, we get Plessy versus Ferguson, which is the federal government, the Supreme Court, validating Jim Crow by saying that separate can be equal. And we're going to have 70 years of nonsense, of lynching and violence and literacy tests and grandfather clauses, of poll taxes, of intimidation, of customs, socially, psychological warfare, all kinds of things that make me sick to my stomach. And the one thing that gets me as a history teacher that I think a lot of people don't mention is all of the lost innovation. We in America like a lot to talk about our innovation and, our ideas that spring forth from the people. Think about all of those poems and all of those inventions, all of those math formulas, all of those painters that never got to do what they were supposed to do because they were trapped in the land of Jim Crow. So, it is what it is, and we are where we are. But we should recognize what Reconstruction was, which is eventually a failure, until we rebirth the 14th Amendment with Brown versus Board of Ed. So, what do you need to know at the end of the day? Let's wrap it up. You need to know hugs and slugs. You really do. The president's hug, right? Lincoln and Johnson. Maybe attach yourself to the 10% loyalty oath, which is a very easy requirement for the states to rejoin the Union. The 13th Amendment, and then we can leave those guys alone. And then go to the radical Republicans and start to say, you need to pass the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. We're going to dictate how you are going to be a new state. And in many cases, the radical Republicans would install those Southern governments until it was safe to have a vote. Hugs and slugs. There you go, guys. I hope that we didn't fry your brain. And certainly come back for more lectures. Check down in the description because I am always pasting my EDU guru friends, some of the geniuses that I've met through YouTube that really are teaching the world amazing things. And check out the Polypop Network, of course, where you're going to find awesome people doing awesome things because awesome is awesome. Awesome. See you guys later.